Hello again, my name is Dexter Valles and I'm here to take you through a small journey on time management. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about time management? We talked about it in an earlier module that I've put up on YouTube, and we talked about Stephen Covey's matrix, the urgent, not urgent, important, not important issues of time management. But the question that I'd like to ask you, and I know the answer already because I'm in the same box myself, is how many of us are really able to manage time effectively and efficiently? We seem to hope that time will cater to our needs rather than we cater to how time wears out. And as we've already said, time versus money, time is the more important resource because that ticks on and goes away, never to come back again, while money can be made up. Somehow we take time rather lightly, thinking we have all the time in the world, but we don't. And at the end of the day, when we look back at what we've spent in terms of time, we sometimes can't even remember where the time has gone. I don't know about you, but I often find that happening to me. And after a lot of head scratching, you realize that you've spent your time doing a large number of little things that didn't count for much ultimately to you. Maybe they counted for others. So we need to look at Stephen Covey's matrix and try and understand the four quadrants of time. Not that we're trying to box time into four little boxes, but at least from there we can understand where our time goes and how we can deal with it more efficiently and effectively on a regular basis. So the box number one we're talking about in the urgent and not urgent versus important and not important matrix. Box number one is quadrant number one. And quadrant number one says this is everything that is important and urgent and needs to be get done. Now, if you have a look at how you organize your diary, if you do keep one, or you have a schedule, you'd probably put a lot of things down in the to-do list. And you'd have them put according to your priorities, like priority A, B, C, D, E, F, G, in that order that needs to be done. But when you come back home at the end of that day and you look back at your schedule, and you may wonder whether those A, B, C, D, E, F, G things got done in any case, and if they got done in that sequence, or what else came in the way of it getting done. So quadrant one is the do quadrant, where you've got to get things done. You need to strike out as many things as you put in your list as having been done. So how do we strike out things is by keeping that box available for those things that we put in. Which means if that's where we are performing, if that's where our life lies, if that's where our future lies, it obviously has to be funded from somewhere else. That somewhere else is usually quadrant two. Things that are not urgent but are extremely important. So for example, I'm sure a lot of you have two-wheelers or four-wheelers or some kind of equipment, machinery that you use that needs to be serviced. The question is do you service it on time? When it's time for you to service your bike or your scooter or your car, are you on time? Usually we are. If we are late, we are a little late, not all that late. But sometimes we let it slip by, and you know what tends to happen when you don't service. One is you fortunately get reminders every now and then from your service station or from the people you bought your car or two-wheeler from who would be servicing it. But what happens is when you give it too late, you may end up with some mechanical problems or electrical problems or anyway performance problems that could strand you sometimes in the middle of the road, pushing your car or bike in the midst of heavy traffic, not the most comfortable kind of scenario that you'd like to envision yourself, right? I know it's a terrible thing when the most convenient thing to you becomes an inconvenience, because the inconvenience is so great you wish you never had it in the first place. Well, if you take care of your car and your bike, how about taking care of yourself? How about taking care of your health? How about not waiting for the heart attack to start looking out for yourself? How to be able to make enough time and space for yourself so that you can lead a reasonably balanced life, or a life that you can get back into balance if you realize how unbalanced it has got. So Where do you make space for this? It's in quadrant 2. It's not just you and yourself and your health and what you want for your future, where you need to sit down and make plans, probably certify yourself a little more, maybe qualify yourself a little more, make space for that to happen. Even if it is online learning, you need to provide space for that to happen. If you can't provide space for that to happen, you've got to ask yourself, where is all my time going? Yeah, who am I spending it on? It's also about creating relationships, the right ones, because relationships drive results. And the more we know people who can help us get to where we want to go, the quicker we get there. So it's not just relationships, it's about networking with the right kind of people who'd be willing to help you. To create that willingness, you need to spend time on the relationship. You cannot suddenly appear in a relationship and demand help. Yeah, people will give it to you for some time, but after some time, they're not going to be able to do that for you. It's like going to the bank too many times to borrow money. So even Stephen Covey talks about this as emotional bank accounting, where whenever we meet anybody, we tend to open a khata, we tend to open an account with them, an emotional account. And the more we deposit into that emotional account unconditionally by doing little things, not necessarily the major things, we start building up our bank balance in that emotional account, and people are more likely to help us when we ask them. Sometimes they even offer us help even without asking them, and that would be really nice to know. So Q2, quadrant 2 is where we need to develop the rest of our life. We need to spend time making the blueprint, working things out, seeing if it can work out or not, and asking for help, creating time for that, making time and space for ourselves. That would be able to help our Q1 happen even better. But we have Q3, which are things that are urgent for you to do because they're urgent to someone else whom you are obliged to. Maybe your boss, maybe your spouse, maybe your kids, maybe other people in the office, anybody else other than you who needs things to be done urgently, and they are not important to you, they are important to the other people. So this is the box of things being urgent but not important to you. So examples of these could be, if you look into your life, you'll find, dozens of them. I'm sure they clutter a lot of your life in any case. These are things like somebody needs help with a presentation, the boss calls you to help him on an assignment which he is going to work on and present to higher management. A client calls you on something that has happened in the past or has to happen, and asks you to spend time on that. This is not going to result in any immediate business, and that could be a Q2 where you're actually developing the relationship, but there could be something that spills over into Q3 depending on the inordinate amount of time that you need to spend doing that. So there's a whole lot of things that happen. You go to the office and it's somebody's birthday party and you have an important call to make, but people drag you over to cut a cake. That call comes, it's put on hold, and then you can't get back. So every day we meet the Q3 demon in our office, at our home, on the way, and you're going to have to look that demon in the eye and say, hey, hang on, wait a bit. Can I defer this? Can I put it for some time later? Okay, I can't defer it. Can I delegate it? Can I delegate it to somebody who's willing to help me? Not necessarily my subordinate. It could be someone sideways in the organization, a peer maybe. Could I send it upwards to, a superior, a boss, somebody else who could handle it? After all, we're all working for the same organization, and we're all, at the same point in our life at that point of time, no matter what the hierarchy is. We're all trying to get things done. So again, do you have enough of a relationship with others in your team, your superiors, your subordinates, your peers, your colleagues, in order to be able to ask them to help you in this matter of delegation? Well, if you can't either defer it or delegate it, you got to see how much time you can spare for it. Not necessary that you have to do everything at that point of time. Naturally, you'll have to make a call, a judgment call, depending on, what is the level of importance of that to the other person, how urgent it is, and are you the only person who can sort it out? So from your Q3 box, you will end up doing some part of it. But hopefully that should not absorb everything that you had kept reserved for Q1, which is where you need to do and get things done for yourself, and Q2, where you needed to actually develop relationships and do things better for the future. So you've got to look and balance it. Now, how much time should you be spending in Q4, which is the time waster quadrant, which is about nothing that is urgent and nothing that is important? Is there anything like that in life? Of course there is. Yeah, because when you look at these three, you're so busy doing it. When you need to relax and recover, sometimes we tend to spend a whole amount of time in Q4 just recovering from the stress of what happens in Q1, Q2, Q3, or more Q1 and Q3 and Q2 versus Q3 to get things done into Q1. So that kind of stress, frustration leads us to, you know, take a seat, take a look back at our life, and just go to sleep, maybe, because we feel that we can't do anything about it. So we end up doing things that we think will help the stress of that moment. And anything that has helped us in stress before becomes a habit. So some of the habits that you develop could come and occupy itself in Q4. Like maybe you could end up, speaking on the phone a lot to a lot of people, chatting inane things. You could spend your time on the internet browsing things that don't really support your line of work. You could end up watching a lot of movies on the telly. You could end up sleeping a lot, much more than necessary. You could end up eating a lot, drinking a lot, smoking a lot. All the kinds of habits and vices tend to pile up when Q4 stakes its claim to your time. So we need to minimize that. If you look at it percentage-wise, Stephen Covey has something to say about it, but if you were to look at it sensibly, where would you like to spend most of your time? Most of your time, according to me and even Stephen Covey, would be to spend your time in quadrant 2, where you develop what you need to do, make plans, where you create the future that you want to live. When you spend that kind of time, and it's more than 50% of your time should be there, maybe 60% of your time, you could then devote doing what you've planned in quadrant 1, and therefore when you plan a lot, you don't need time to execute too much. So around 20% of your time could be spent in finishing off what you have kept for Q1. Naturally, you need some time for Q3 because that's also equally important for others and therefore becomes important for you in a secondary way. So around 15% of your time, if it could be spent there. So now, relatively speaking, what we're really saying is a large part of time should be spent in planning, developing, managing relationships, creating the future. A substantial amount of time should be spent in doing now what needs to be done, because the present is important to the future. If you don't have a present, you won't have a future. And some kind of time needs to be spent in quadrant 3 doing what other people need you to do, because that's also part of what we do. And a minimal amount of time, something like 5% of your time, if you can measure what 5% is, in quadrant 4. So if you take your day and you take the day from the time you get up to the time you come back home and you divide it into half hours, 1 hour segments, try and plot and see what you are doing every day. Try it for a week, then take an average. Now it's difficult sometimes for us whose every day is so different from the other day. But see if you can come to some kind of weekly average of what you have been doing in your weekdays, and then take your weekends separately and see how that is being spent. You will be able to look at Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and you may be surprised with some of the results. Now, when I did this for me some time ago, I found that an inordinate amount of time, the 60% of my time was in Q3. Around 10 to 15% only was in Q1, getting things done, what I needed to get done. Q2 was almost wiped out. There was almost no time for myself. And Q4, wow, that was a giant quadrant too. Because if you look at 60 and 15 and let's say 5, so you're looking at 80, about 20%, which means around 4 times more than what is kind of stipulated, if you may want to call it that, for Q4, is what I was spending there. I've been able to move that around significantly now to get things done in Q1, spend a lot of time in Q2. I spend time in qualifying myself even more, certifying myself, reading, spending time with friends, creating the right relationships with clients, spending time creating the platform on which I would like my life to be based. and I find it far more satisfying. As a result of which, I don't really have to spend too much time in Q4 because all the energy and excitement is happening in Q2, and that spills over into managing what I need to do in Q1. And there is enough energy for Q3, and I welcome the Q3 because it allows me to shift focus from myself to others. And when we talk about empathy and we talk about being able to empathize with others and connect with others, I think Q3 is a place we can do that. As long as that empathy doesn't overwhelm everything else that you do and ends up putting you on the side shelf. Yeah. So, till we meet again, think about what we've talked about in each of these quadrants, Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And the next time we meet, maybe you could put a comment on this video and tell me, how are you spending your time? Are you reasonably happy with your time? Are you unhappy with the way you're spending your time? Could you be doing something about it? Is there any other trick up your sleeve that you could share with us on how to manage time better? Because this is a large landscape, and whatever we are talking here is not the only thing that we can do to manage time. These are some of the things that we can do. It's a structured way at looking how we can do things. But of course, there is much more that we can do, and we'd love to hear from you. What are you doing about managing your time better? Till we see you again, goodbye and God bless.